With exchanges between Washington, D.C. and Pyongyang becoming even more menacing, fear is growing across the United States. According to a recent poll, as many as 2/3 of Americans possibly believe that North Korea is a serious threat. We decided to talk to New Yorkers and see if they could pinpoint exactly where this serious threat is coming from. Do you feel like North Korea is a threat to the United States?
I don't think so.
Am I paranoid? No, but I definitely feel that North Korea is a potential definite threat.
I think North Korea is a serious threat to the region, but not to the United States.
I'm not scared of North Korea. I'm not scared of, I'm scared of who our leaders are in many countries and how they're behaving. They're not necessarily behaving in the interest of the people fully. It's becoming more of a bravado.
Anytime you're dealing with a country that's led by an irrational dictator, I think you need to prepare for the worst.
Yeah, it's pretty threatening, and we responded in a threatening way. That's scary.
Can you point to North Korea on this map?
Yeah. So there.
No, that's Siberia.
Okay. There.
That's still Siberia.
Okay.
That's Southeast Asia. That's like Vietnam, Myanmar. There you go. Yeah, that's North Korea.
I knew that she would get it.
Can you find North Korea on this map of the world? Oh, that's Australia, actually.
Oh, wow.
Until very recently, very few Americans knew anything about North Korea, except maybe what the leader's face looked like. Even the names. Even today, they can't keep track of the different leaders' names. But this was a big problem at the end of World War II. As you probably know, that there weren't so many Korea specialists when America came into Korea and occupied the South. This was a joint occupation between the Soviet Union and America. Soviet Union would militarily occupy the North. South Korea militarily occupy the South for the purpose at the time of a unified Korean government. Now we know that didn't work out, but one of the reasons why it didn't work out is because the America side was very unprepared for what they were doing. And this, some would argue, would be a contributing factor for why Korea remains divided today. So I thought not only was it very fascinating and interesting to me, but I thought it was very important. So North Korea has been something, particularly in terms of international policy, being a very peripheral, very just something that's just on the outside that people haven't really paid attention that much. And I would argue that because it has been something that American and U.S. policymakers and by extension the larger public has not paid attention to enough, it's created more of a problem. And because it's more of a problem with the U.S. side perhaps misunderstanding a lot of actions that have taken place in North Korea, and it's reached a boiling point, particularly several months ago, probably almost a year ago by now, about 9 months ago when Trump and Kim Jong-un were kind of having these arguments about who has the bigger nuclear button, and I would argue that because the whole period of not knowing and not paying enough attention to that is why people are more engaged and more interested in that. It got to a point where I believe a friend of mine, she lives in Hawaii, and she was talking about buying some masks, oxygen masks for her baby, and being worried about a threat of nuclear weapons or nuclear attack. Because it was at such a boiling point, I think people realized that if we are going to respond to North Korea nuclear weapons development, it has to be a way that's very smart, and it's going to ensure our survival. And so because of that, I think a lot of people realize that it's more important. And so now you probably see it on the news just every single day. And I also think that that South Korea has kind of demonstrated to the world of how important it is for them. I mean, how one thing that an American American president can say can potentially affect numerous lives on both sides of the peninsula. I think that now people have, for the most part, a significant number of people are very interested in what's happening geopolitically in the Korean region, and people do actually genuinely care about what's going to happen, not just for us, but for the Korean people as well. So the next step is to ensure that people's information about North Korea and the relationship between North Korea and South Korea, the relationship between the U.S. and North Korea, is as accurate for one and as complete and thorough as possible. And this is going to be more of a challenge because until very recently, it seemed that anyone who said anything about North Korea, it would become big news. For instance, when Jang Sung-taek, who was, as you know, he was the uncle of the current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. There's a rumor that he was executed by, he was eaten by dogs who had been starved for a week. And this was from a Chinese satirical website, but in the international news, it was reported as fact. Yeah. And so I think we've come some way from that, but there's assumption of so many people that North Korea is just one big labor camp. And yes, there are labor camps in North Korea, and it's something we should continuously focus on. But what about the rest of North Korea society? What about people's daily life? What about their work, their jobs, their family budget? What is it like to live in the shoes of a North Korean? And not just during the 1990s, which was a time of famine and hardship for North Koreans, but what is it like now? And because I was reading a book by Hazel Smith. She worked with some NGOs, but she's also a scholar as well. And she said, well, regardless of whether or not the government changes in North Korea, the society is always changing. And I think it's very important that we kind of understand what that change in society actually looks like. This is kind of what I seek to do. I kind of try to go beyond the surface level. And what I am interested in particularly is the kind of the intersection between cultural history and history of industrialization. So particularly after the Korean War. How was North Korea government and state able to kind of create this whole political technology of being able to mobilize just millions of people into these projects, political projects, industrial projects that would really keep the regime afloat. And a lot of people would assume, and are correct to some extent, that it involves a lot of fear and intimidation. And certainly that's a part of it. But one thing that does not get as much attention is kind of the soft power element of it. One recent project I've worked on is looking at the fertilizer industry in North Korea, which began as a Japanese colonial project, but after the Japanese colonial empire fell, There were North Koreans Koreans at the time. I mean, the North Korean state hadn't exactly started yet, but there was this need to put all these, to kind of continue the production process and make the North Korean state benefit from the huge industrial apparatus that the Japanese had left behind. And so one thing I found was this book of poems, and these were love poems to machinery. And so what I believe this was an attempt to put a lot of women into operator positions in the factories, in the chemical fertilizer factories in particular. And so there are all these poems about tending to every need of the compressor, the compressor that can make fertilizer and everything. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? I need to adjust this dial here. And this happened just within a few years after the Japanese Empire fell and Korea was liberated from colonialism. And then there's also so much with music as well, because for every kind of industrial project, there was typically a song to accompany that. And so fear and intimidation is certainly one part of it, but another part of it is how the regime used poems, songs, literature, and to make it seem natural to do all of these things, to engage in very hard, strenuous labor. To follow the agenda of the state, and so there's a whole history here, and so I believe that the reason why perhaps attitudes towards North Korea has shifted so much is because North Korea has been able to extend this kind of soft power, political technology internationally. Because there was the one concert, Samjian Orchestra. Samjian is it's a kind of a composite orchestra of all these different orchestras in North Korea, but it's a big symphony orchestra. They have singers as well, and they played a concert, 2 concerts in South Korea during the Olympics. And just watching the audience members' faces, and these are South Koreans who, and many were I mean, it's hard to say how this would impact the younger generation, but the older generation, at least at this concert, to see their faces and to see them just like tears to their eyes when the North Korean singers are talking about like, we will meet again. I mean, that's what like 다시 만나요, like 영이 만나요. dreams of this unification and hope and everything, that one day a nation that was separated could come back together. And so the North Korea cultural administrators are able to take this kind of thing that's already there and make themselves seem less scary than decades of kind of a Cold War mentality. And so yeah, I think that has played a role and a sign of less hostility for North Korean people and even the North Korean leader on behalf of the South Koreans. I was interested in Korean religions, and I found a chapter in a book on Korean religions called About Juche, which is a North Korean ideology.
You know the name of the tower? Do you? Yeah, that's right. So the name of the tower is the Tower of the Juche Order. So Juche Order that has been created by the President Kim Il-sung. It has the main essence that we are the masters of our own destiny. Ju stands for master and Che means body. So Juche literally can be translated as a master of oneself. The Juche Order has been renamed as Kim Il-sungism, Kim Jong-ilism nowadays, so that Kim Il-sungism, Kim Jong-ilism is still the guiding ideology of the Workers' Party.
I wasn't really sure if that book, that Juche can be considered a religion or not. It's a very intellectual question, academic question. But it made me very curious about North Korean ideology. And then I read this book by this British journalist who had a job translating English to English translations, because the English translations that the North Koreans did were not exactly kind of standard English from what we do today, but so they needed a native speaker to make it. And there's just one section, that one part that he was translating, and it was about South Korea and how United States was using U.S. Military soldiers as biological weapons to make the South Korean women have AIDS. Yeah. This was North Korean propaganda. I'm not sure if the audience was primarily domestic or just international audiences that believed in what North Korea was doing, but it was an attempt to kind of treat something that was a somewhat controversial topic, U.S. soldiers in South Korea, but to just blow it into something incredible. Looking at U.S. soldiers as biological weapons to infect the South Korean population with AIDS. And so when I saw that, I said, I have to figure out, I have to find out how this came about. How did this kind of worldview and come to be? And then just the more I studied about North Korea, the more important I realized it was.